Good morning, students. Let us continue with the section literary terms. Today, we are going to discuss two literary terms of our syllabus: war poetry and ballad. Let us start with war poetry. The First World War had considerably influenced the poets of that age, and the poets glorified the war and considered it honorable to represent their country in the war and even die for the sake of their nation. Some enthusiastic ones even participated in the war, and amongst them some returned alive and later expressed the trauma of the war through their poetry. These poets were called the war poets or the trench poets or the soldier poets, and their poetry is known as war poetry. War poetry deals with the theme of war and its consequences. The term war poetry is misleading as the poetry was actually against war and attacked the notion of glorification of war. Some of the characteristic features of war poetry are: number one, depiction of the horror of trench life. The most noteworthy feature of war poetry is its depiction of the horrid trench life which the soldiers were compelled to lead. The filth and unhygienic environment of the trenches was intolerable. Poets like Charles Hamilton, Wilfred Owens, and Sassoon have written very feelingly about the living in rotten trenches. Number two, realistic presentation of death and destruction. War poetry presents harsh reality of the battlefield in a natural manner using realistic images and thought provoking language. It gives a faithful account of the bloodshed, mutilation, violence, death, and destruction caused by war. Number three, compassion for soldiers. War poetry expresses a deep and sincere feeling of compassion for the soldiers and depicts their state of nervous breakdown and mental shock caused due to constant pressure and fear that they are exposed to. Number four, expression of anti war sentiments. This is also one of the features. This poetry criticizes the notion of glorification of war and also propagates the message that wars are always destructive and barbarous. Number 5. Rich in images and onomatopoeic words. Whereas the war poetry is concerned, it provides a rich pictorial presentation of war and is also enriched with huge stock of onomatopoeic words. Renowned war poets include Wilfred Owen, Sassoon, Rosenberg, R. Graves, E. Thompson, and Rupert Brooke. Some of the memorable poems and elegies on war theme were also contributed by Hardy, Bunyan, Houseman, and others. Rudyard Kipling's poetry struck a different and more patriotic note from that of most of his contemporaries. The Second World War produced a more desperate response regarding war and its ramifications in poetry were also produced. The poets most commonly associated with it are Keith Douglas, Alan Owen, and Sidney Keyes. That was all about the term war poetry. Let us discuss another term of our syllabus entitled ballad. The ballad is a tale in verse originally intended to be sung to an audience. It is usually based on events such as family disaster, an exciting adventure, a love encounter, fierce battle, and so on. The tale is usually fierce and tragic, and frequently introduces the supernatural. The tale opens abruptly without any attempt at systematic introduction. Often, the same lines are repeated from stanza to stanza as a refrain, or stock phrases are freely used. The story is told in a simple, impersonal manner, and it usually has vivid dialogues. It is usually composed in ballad measure quatrain, in which the first and the third lines are 4-foot iambic, and the second and fourth 3-foot iambic, with the second and fourth lines rhyming together. Coleridge's Rime of the Ancient Mariner is a famous example of ballad. Torudat's poetry collection, Ancient Ballads and the Legends of Hindustan include many exquisite ballads used on Indian themes. That's all about today's lecture. In the coming or in the next lecture, we shall be having the rest of the terms we are having in our syllabus. Mark it here. Thank you very much.